Hi everyone, welcome back to the 21 and Sensory podcast with me, Emily. I'm really excited today to chat to special guest Dr. Emma Cernis. Emma is a clinical psychologist and researcher with expertise in complex mental health difficulties. She is an assistant professor of clinical psychology at the University of Birmingham and works within the School of Psychology and the Institute for Mental Health. Through her research, Emma aims to improve the understanding and treatment of dissociative difficulties. Clinically, Emma has expertise in working with young adults with dissociative symptoms before or during a first episode of psychosis, and with children, teens, and families affected by sexual trauma. Her research focuses on understanding dissociative experiences from a cognitive behavioural perspective, and her current research is centred around dissociative experiences, so primarily FDA dissociation, which is felt sense of anomaly, which I will be asking Emma about, but also depersonalisation and derealisation. Also, psychological factors that may underlie dissociation, including alexithymia, self efficacy, affect intolerance, and emotion regulation. So, Emma, would you like to say hello?
Hello. Hi. Thank you. Really excited to be here and to chat with you. So thanks for inviting me on.
No worries. It's great to be able to chat to you about all things dissociation as someone with lived experience, but also I'm really intrigued to hear more about your research and your own kind of clinical practice as well. So maybe we could do a sort of bit of a background to you in terms of your studies and career so far. Maybe that would be
Yeah.
a good place to start, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course. Gosh, how far back do you want me to go?
That's a really good question. I guess maybe from when you kind of went down that avenue of kind of mental health and kind of
Yeah.
what you
Yeah.
initially studied, maybe, or is that
No, we can do that. That's
yeah?
great. Yeah. Um, so I mean, the reason I ask is because I decided from about age, I don't know, 14, that I wanted to be a psychologist. I remember
Ah.
sort of marching up to my teacher at school and saying, I have to do psychology GCSE because I want to do psychology at university. And they sort of had to sit me down and say, like, whoa, whoa, you don't actually need to. We don't do that here. And no, you don't. But I did get there in the end. So I did my psychology undergraduate degree, really loved that, and particularly really enjoyed kind of learning about different mental health problems, thinking about ways of different ways of thinking about mental health, lots of different perspectives, and yeah, I just found the whole thing fascinating, which I kind of knew I would because I knew I already wanted to do psychology as a job.
Mhm.
So that led me on to a master's in mental health studies to kind of get even further into, how do we conceptualize, how do we think about mental health problems, and then how do we go on and help people with them. So what I really enjoyed about my master's was it covered a range of different talking therapies. So we kind of learned about CBT, about psychodynamic, about family therapy, but we also learnt about different medications and what they're supposed to do and how they work and the different kind of clusters and families of them. So I felt like I got a really rounded experience through that. Um, and then I got into essentially, I was just looking for a job. But I ended up, it's fantastic how these things work out, isn't it? I ended up in a research assistant post, which I hadn't realized was a thing that you could
Mhm.
do, until somebody said, when I was telling them, I can't get any assistant psychologist posts, and that's what I really want to do. And they said, have you tried a research assistant role? Didn't know what that was, but I landed on my feet. I ended up in a really amazing team at the University of Oxford, run by Professor Daniel Freeman, who's a fantastic person and scientist and psychologist, um, working on clinical studies, where essentially the aim was to test new talking therapies for people who were really suffering and having a hard time with paranoia.
Okay.
So through that, I got to meet people who were experiencing paranoia, chat with them about how they were finding things, and also see how research works and how we create and improve treatments and how we think about delivering therapy in the best way possible, in the most effective way possible. And that just really sparked an excitement in me that science, obviously, you can use it for the greater good. Everyone knows that. But to see that happening was so exciting.
Hmm.
Um, so that sparked my interest in kind of doing it as a job, blending that clinical approach of wanting to help people and knowing how to do the therapy, but with the research side of making that therapy as good as it can be, demonstrating that it works to other people, getting the information out there to people. Um, yeah. So I went on and did my clinical training. So I'm qualified to do that. I'm a clinical psychologist. And
Hmm.
then I went on and did a PhD, where essentially a lot of people think about that as your research training. You learn how to do different studies and you learn all of the procedure of doing research in a university. Um, and then fast forward a couple of years, and I'm here at the University of Birmingham, which is really exciting because I get to focus all of my time on dissociation. I say all of my time. I am also teaching on things that are not dissociation, but I seem to always find a way to sneak it in. Yeah, so that's me.
Would you say that's like your main kind of sort of research interest is kind of dissociation?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, this
Hmm.
is going to sound really strange, but once you've worked in psychosis clinically, research wise, there will always be a bit of your heart there. And I will always kind of, yeah, want to remember my roots in the kind of psychosis world and chatting to
Hmm.
people with experiences of psychosis. But yeah, I'm dedicated to dissociation now. That's my
Hmm.
area of expertise.
Also, it's really nice to hear that you're keen to still remember where you came from, kind of thing, is
Yeah.
really good. Because I feel like a lot of mental health kind of, especially sort of the more kind of psychosis paranoia, is really misunderstood and
Mhm.
not very well kind of just, I guess, documented or talked about.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's nice that you've kind of had that experience.
Yeah, to help people feel that they were being listened to and they were being heard,
Hmm.
even though what they were going through was the scariest time of their life. That felt very meaningful, and that felt like a kind of job where even on your worst days, even on a Monday morning, you still want to
Hmm.
get out of bed and do it because you can see the point of it. That's what I love about my work, really, is that I can always see the point of what I'm doing.
Hmm. That's good. That's good that you've found that. And I guess also like the kind of transferable bit from that is that
Mm,
the world is scary for people coping and living with dissociation as well, in terms
absolutely,
of
yeah.
depersonalization and also derealization, being out in the world and feeling so kind of unreal. So
Yeah.
it's nice to know that you get that
And being misunderstood.
and that, yeah.
Yeah, because I think most of the time that I was working in the psychosis group, if I chatted to a friend who wasn't in psychology or, that pub chat of what do you do for work, if I said,
Mhm.
oh, I work with people with paranoia or I work with people who've kind of been diagnosed with psychosis, most of the time, it got really boring. Most of the time, people were like, oh, isn't that dangerous? And you just sort of, you want to throw your drink over them, really, but, absolutely not. That is just ridiculous kind of media sensational nonsense.
Mhm.
And there, that is the way that psychosis is misunderstood, I guess, is that we've got these yeah, let's not get me ranting, but we've got these kind of misperceptions of what psychosis means. And I think for
Mm.
people experiencing dissociation, DPDR, so depersonalization, derealization, the misconception that they have to struggle against is people not knowing what they're talking about, um, or thinking that the problem they're describing doesn't really exist.
Mhm.
Neither of which is particularly helpful.
And I've also kind of find, having tried to work out what was going on with myself,
Mm,
like I only found out online because other
yeah.
people had documented. Because otherwise, if you say to people around you, I don't feel real,
Hmm.
they have nothing to relate it to. It's not
Hmm.
like anxiety or depression, which in themselves is very, very hard to cope with.
Yeah.
But to say to someone, I'm sat in front of you, but I don't feel like I'm here or that I'm real,
Hmm.
it feels so stupid, but it's exactly how I feel.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it's the
Yeah.
understanding that is really tricky.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's incredible how many people only figure out what this is through an internet search. And that's
Mm,
kind of one of the main bits of advice I give when I'm training clinicians is, if somebody comes to you and says they figured out what it is because of an internet search, please don't do that knee-jerk reaction of assuming they're self-diagnosing or there's some terrible kind of internet rabbit hole that they've fallen down, because
mm,
where else are people supposed to get this information from?
mm-hmm,
Um, so, one of the things that I try and do with my research and my clinical work is to skill up clinicians, because most of the time they've not heard of this through no fault of their own.
mm-hmm,
So, just trying to let people know about it so that they don't panic when somebody says, "I found it online." That is the only place it currently is online,
mm-hmm.
most of the time.
Yeah, I just feel like that's where you find that sense of community.
Yeah.
Whereas, kind of me, like when I was going to go to my GP about it, I
Mm,
tried to pick a GP that I knew and was female and who I thought might be nice and might be
mm,
like, I was trying to almost pitch it
yeah.
like to someone who might understand. And she didn't, but she was keen to help, which
Mm,
is,
half the battle.
half the battle. Exactly. But you're right, like GPs aren't equipped as a first line of kind of seeing someone to
Mm,
I didn't feel real. I was sat in the room and I wasn't there.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
what does a GP say to that? So yeah, it is definitely very interesting. And I know you've done kind of a recent like research study, which is how I came across you and your work, in terms of sort of 16 to 25-year-olds, I think,
Yeah.
that you kind of targeted. Would you be able to tell us a bit more about kind of how that came about?
Yeah. So this study I sort of referred to in my head as the sources of stress study, so the
Hmm.
SOS study, because I just became really interested in why are young people experiencing dissociation, and are there particular kinds of stress or patterns of stress that make someone more likely to experience it?
Hmm.
Because we've got a lot of really excellent research that demonstrates that trauma is a source of stress that can create dissociation, but we've also got lots of research that kind of says other types of stress could also cause this. And as far as I could see through my searches, I couldn't find a paper where they'd kind of put them all into one like analysis,
Hmm.
and tried to figure out how much each was doing in terms of creating this experience for people. And I was quite interested in that because, I mean, anecdotally, I think we know that young people are under perhaps more stress than ever. Um, Social media is constant, and that has a lot of unhealthy messages embedded within it, as well as kind of being able to find community. It's got those pressures as well.
Hmm.
People are having to grow up really fast in really difficult circumstances, and unfortunately, trauma is still happening to young people. So, young people are dealing with a lot, and if all of these things might be causing dissociation, I kind of just wanted to understand that a bit better. Um,
Hmm.
so it actually started off as a way to get my undergraduate students to do something interesting, because I thought that they might be keen on this question of how young people are experiencing dissociation, since they're, in their kind of later teenage years and early 20s themselves.
Hmm.
And I was very lucky that actually the lead author on this paper that we're talking about, Roberta, was in that group, and she's an absolutely fantastic future psychologist. She's in training now to be a clinical psychologist. Um, and she kind of took this project and ran with it. And we were thinking about, how can we look at all of these risk factors in a really interesting way. And I went to just this kind of, they call it a sand pit, and I'm not really sure why. You go into this room and there's some kind of people from one group of thinking over one side and people from another group of thinking over another side. So in this one we had people with data, so me and my kind of big spreadsheet of data from 16 to 25-year-olds who'd completed a survey online, very generously giving up their time to do that. And on the other side of this sandpit event was a lot of really excellent statisticians and computer scientists from within the University of Birmingham. And the idea was basically for us to say, look, this is the data that I've got. Have you got ways of making interesting things out of this? And I was
Okay.
really lucky that a couple of people came over and said, oh, you know what, you could do machine learning with that. And I'd heard of machine learning,
Hmm.
and I've heard about it a lot more since, let me tell you. But yeah, we found a really cool way to analyze this data to kind of come up with some profiles, essentially some risk profiles of what patterns of stress and negative experiences make a young person perhaps more likely to experience dissociation. The idea being that we can then say, right, let's watch out for these people, let's offer them help before they need it,
Mhm.
or let's ask them about dissociation before they even mention it, just in case, because they might be at higher risk.
And I guess also, like, if you're mentioning it, then it's the earlier people know about it
Hmm.
and think, like, oh, that has been mentioned to me before. I wonder if that's what I'm experiencing. Would
Yeah.
be a nicer way of understanding it than having to Google stuff.
Yes. Yeah. And in
Definitely.
fact, one of the projects that I'm working on this year, we are developing a resource for young people that will kind of give people the facts, give them some signposting,
Mhm.
give them some kind of basic self-care ideas. But we're basing all of that on lived experience of, that first time you realize that you're dissociating, and the fears and the concerns that you've got, the questions that you've got about it. So we're co-producing that with some young people who've experienced dissociation themselves. So we're
Mhm.
hoping that might be an alternative to Google as well.
Yeah, and I guess also just like a bit like kind of psychosis as well, like the earlier intervention,
Yeah,
like if you can understand it kind of early on and kind of catch those feelings early on, I do think people might have a better chance at it
absolutely.
becoming like it not becoming as chronic kind of, experience. So
Yeah,
that sounds really good, that kind of resource, just to know how to look after yourself is
yeah.
hard in itself.
It is. Yeah, it is. And especially if you don't know what it is, then you don't know where to start, really. So yeah, I'm really excited about that resource, and yeah, I can't wait to see it get made. We're just forming our lived experience group at the moment, so we're waiting to kind of set a date for our first meeting to discuss it, the whole project. So I'm excited.
So is that a new project kind of off the back of the one you've just done, or?
Yeah, it's a new project, sort of off the back of what came next after the one we've just talked about. So after the risk
Okay.
factors, I started a study, that I'm calling the ABCD study, which, I hadn't realised actually there's a massive, big data set called ABCD, and I hadn't realised. So every time I say this to somebody who's aware of that data set, they keep thinking that I'm talking about something else. Anyway, attitudes and beliefs concerning dissociation. I could have gone for ABCD E if I'd said dissociative experiences.
Oh,
Yeah,
true.
I know. I need to get to the whole alphabet, really. There's got to be a way. Anyway, this ABCD study is all about trying to figure out the attitudes and beliefs that young people have about dissociation. So we're trying to kind of pick up, is there any stigma? Are people
Mhm.
getting good quality information online? Because that might be the only place that they can find it. But we're also asking the same questions, really interestingly, to NHS mental health, professionals,
Okay.
because they don't get they don't get training on this. So what I'm interested in is finding out, are young people coming to mental health services perhaps with a much better idea about what dissociation is than the people who work there?
Mhm.
Um, because young people are talking about dissociation online, and some of that material is good material, some of it isn't.
Mhm.
So I want to kind of know, like, how can we support NHS staff to have really good conversations with young people who need this help? How can we like figure out what young people already know and fill in those gaps? So that's where that kind of booklet came in, is that we'll be able to answer the main worries and fears that come out of that data,
Mhm.
as well as kind of putting in the stuff that we hope that they might pass on to clinicians.
Okay. That's
Hmm.
good that you're almost tackling it from both sides.
Yeah.
You're listening to the people with the lived experience, but also it's got to be better from a healthcare side. Like the fact that I've had to go in with printouts on
Hmm.
kind of things I'm feeling, or
Hmm.
don't know how to put into words to explain myself to clinicians and stuff is really tricky, and it doesn't feel very right either.
Yeah, it's not fair, really, is it, that you have to do their side of things as well as your side of things, and a
Yeah,
lot
you
of
kind
time.
of feel like you're not arguing your case, but sort of.
Yeah, yeah, and like I said, it's really most of the, well, pretty much all the time. It isn't, to be fair, the clinician's fault. Like, they've not had this training.
Oh, absolutely.
And most of the time, when people figure out what I'm doing for my research work, I've been stopped a lot of the times by the kitchen sink. So tell me what dissociation is. Okay, right. And where can I find out more about that? All right. So people
Hmm.
are interested and they are trying to skill themselves up. Like, I've had requests for training and things quite often. So um, I think it's shifting. I think it's moving, and that's why with the ABCD study about kind of surveying these attitudes and beliefs, I've got my fingers crossed and I've got my ethics approval to run this over maybe the next 10 years.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So I can hopefully pick up attitudes shifting.
Hmm.
I'm going to keep my fingers crossed.
Yeah, that'd be
Hope that I can
interesting.
keep this up. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that would be really interesting to kind of see any patterns and changes over the years.
Yeah.
Hopefully, we're going to run the survey every year for undergraduates and every other
Oh,
year
okay.
for GCSE students and NHS clinicians. So we can
Oh,
see over
okay.
that span, are there changes in how young people think about this? Are there changes in how NHS professionals think about this? And hopefully, we'll find that they converge into something that's very accurate and very supportive.
Okay.
um,
That's really interesting though, because I
Fingers
feel like
crossed.
the GCSE age is a great kind of,
Mm,
in obviously the worst way possible, like the most stressful you kind of have
yeah.
felt, I feel.
Yes, I would never want to
Um,
be that age again.
no, me neither. So I feel like that's a good target age group you've
Yes.
got there. Oh,
Yeah,
that's really
exactly.
interesting.
Yeah. So we're I've got a wonderful trainee clinical psychologist, Meg, who's currently recruiting schools to take part in this, the GCSE student survey, so year 10s and year 11s.
Mhm.
Almost exactly the same questions that we're asking the undergraduates. Do you think you know what dissociation is? What is it? What three words come to mind when you think about somebody with dissociation? Where can somebody with dissociation get help? So all sorts of questions around what is it? What information do you have? Do you not have? What kind of attitudes and
Yeah.
beliefs?
Where can you get help? That's a great question to ask that
Yeah,
age group, because I wonder how many of them would, either not know or just say like kind of online or your doctors kind of thing. Um,
yeah. And I really feel for this age group because they support each other a huge amount, which is
mm,
really noble, but also quite a strain on your own kind of resources and coping to
mhm.
be going through your own GCSE stress, home stress, friend stress, whatever is going on, but then also trying to support your friends with their mental health. That's, it's a big
Yeah.
deal.
Also, especially if like you're someone that's prone to taking on other people's like
Hmm.
worries and anxieties, like
Yeah.
about their home life and things like that. Like I feel like it can almost be like secondhand anxiety for someone else and worrying about them more than yourself.
Yeah.
I'm very like that.
Yeah.
I'm more worried about the people around me than I am myself, and don't see that kind of thing.
Yeah. I think that's pretty common. I identify with that as well. But I suppose as a psychologist, that's not a surprise, really, is it? Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So it's really like all the studies that you have going on. Like, how do you have time to teach, to train? Like, how are you fitting this all in? Because it's
Um,
great, but it sounds like a lot.
yeah. I mean, every year on my Christmas list is that time turner that Hermione has in Harry Potter, where she can go and do all of her school subjects at
Excellent.
once. I mean,
Yeah.
no one's bought me one yet, but I'm still holding out hope. Um, how do I do it? I mean, yeah, I don't really know. Things have been quite busy at the moment, I have to admit. I think I am a little bit of a nerd when it comes to organizing. I love
Mhm.
I love a system. I'm just imagining if any of my previous colleagues or current supervisees are listening to this, they are nodding vigorously. I love a system. Um, and yeah, I've got a big wall of post-it notes in my office where I've got all my current projects and all the projects that are coming up, and I can't start them yet, or I don't need to start them yet. But I've also got a patch of post-it notes which are all the ones that I've done. So I think being
Okay.
able to see that you're making progress really helps, because I think sometimes we tick things off a to-do list and then it's gone, and then you
Yeah.
can't, when you look back at the to-do list, you don't see that you've actually done loads. So I
Yes.
quite like being able to see that I have done stuff, and the rest is just kind of planning in times to do particular things. And and I'm getting better at sticking to that. Sometimes I put it in my diary and then completely ignore it and do something else instead. But there you go.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I
So
like that you
I'm not
have
sure that was
that.
an answer.
No, 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 no. I think it was, and the fact that you have almost have that like live sort of visual archive of,
Mm,
this is stuff I have achieved. I get what you
yes.
mean, like because once you've ticked something off, it you know kind of fails to exist anymore. So
Yeah.
yeah,
I think a lot of people who are either anxious or high achievers or a combination of the two, we can always be worrying about the next thing, and thinking about, okay, I've done that. It almost doesn't count now.
yeah,
But it's still a thing that you did. So I think acknowledging that
yeah.
um, helps. Yeah.
Absolutely. And also just being able to see what's coming up is a great
Yes.
kind of do
That's mainly a reminder to myself to say no to things, because quite
uh-huh.
often I get really exciting emails these days, really exciting things about we're going to do this project, or we're thinking about this thing, or there's this something that you can apply for. And I always want to say yes. And I always, I love ideas and I love getting excited by new ideas. So I always want to go for them. But then I
Mhm.
do make myself look at my post-it note wall and think, where is that going to fit? So I have to say no to things now, which is really sad.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I feel like that's a real like researcher thing because I've
Mm.
talked to other kind of researchers on and off this podcast, and they are chronic people pleasers in that they can't say they can't say no, and they're like, Emily, I need to get better at saying no. But if it's exciting and it's within your field of interest, like I can totally understand why you're like, oh, can I fit this in?
Yeah, yeah. I'm getting better in the people pleasing, I have to say. I mean, I've definitely got a long way to go on it, but it is mainly just that, I'm just fascinated by the ideas. And I think with dissociation, it's a field where there is still so much that we don't know.
Mhm.
So almost any idea that you have about dissociation, guarantee that would make a good study. So as soon as anybody suggests anything, I'm like, great, it's not been done, let's do it. Um,
That's going to be a long list.
Yeah, I've got a long list. I've got in one of my many systems, I've got like basically a folder of ideas of things that I would love to research one day. So that's the other trouble is like, a deadline will come up for a bit of funding, or, does anybody got ideas for a project for this kind of student? And I've got
Mhm.
a long list of ideas. I need to remember that that needs to keep me going until I retire, so I can't do it all in one
Oh,
year.
I see. Okay. It's meant to span your entire career. I like that.
Yeah, I am a bit impatient, so yeah.
And do you kind of have do you have the same sort of organization system when it comes to like your clinical work? Like, or is that
Yes.
you do? Yeah.
Yes.
Excellent.
Yeah. Almost especially with clinical work, because you don't want to make mistakes there. Like, I think it's really
Mm.
important. I don't know where I've got this from, but I've got very much like a customer service approach to clinical work, because
Mhm.
I mean, somebody's come to you because they feel rubbish and they want things to be different, right? So the least you
Yeah.
can do is like get letters out on time, or, you know, remember what you talked about last session. So I just think being organized really helps with that. Um, yeah, I don't know. That was a weird thing to to be passionate about, but I am.
No, no, no. Like
Um,
also to know when you're coming into an appointment that you're not going to get muddled up with
yeah,
another kind of case. Like that sort
yeah.
of thing is so important just to, know that someone knows you.
Yeah,
And
that
especially if
honestly is one of my biggest irrational fears. I've got, it's bordering on a phobia that I will say the wrong name to somebody, either
Mhm.
their name or their partner's name, their dog's name. So yeah, I don't know, that must be a very specific psychologist phobia, but
Mhm.
I've got this real, I'm going to say the wrong name. Oh no. Yeah, I haven't done it yet.
Touches wood
Yeah, I
nearby.
literally did. How did you see that?
Just like, um,
Yeah.
also, it must be really interesting as well because it sounds like you work across a real age range of
Yeah.
people, and you must see people at different kind of stages of life.
Yeah.
And do you have to kind of almost shift your practice a little bit depending on a child versus an adult coming in, kind of thing? Like, how do you? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I do actually, yeah. And I think that's something that I never really planned. So I went into clinical training sort of thinking this is great. You have to do an adult placement, you have to do a young person's placement, you have to do learning disability, older adults, you have to do a specialist. So I was like, fantastic, great. I get to see the whole range. I sort of have
Mhm.
to, I get to try before I buy. So my plan going in was figure out where I want to work for the rest of my career, and I would be able to figure that out. And what actually ended up happening is, yeah, I found this interest in dissociation. And to me, it's sort of more about helping people with that problem, no matter who they are, rather than working with a particular group of people
Mhm.
in terms of an age or anything else. So yeah, so I actually really like that challenge of working across the different ages. And yeah, you do have to change things a little bit, and it's not always as you'd expect, I think. So what I'm learning, I set up a private practice quite recently that takes pretty much all ages, as long as we're talking about dissociation and depersonalization.
Mhm.
And what's really interesting about that is meeting with the younger clients, so sort of people who are in their mid-teens. They describe dissociation and depersonalization exactly the same way as adults do. People are in their 30s or 40s. But it's kind of like you were saying about the early intervention thing. There's sort of fewer layers
Mhm.
to it. So it's still complicated and it's still horrible, but there are fewer kind of layers of worries about worries, and strategies to cope with strategies. So
Yeah.
there's kind of fewer. That onion is a bit smaller to unpeel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. And I guess also if potentially people are younger and have just started to experience this, you might be able to pinpoint more kind of, I don't know, any sort of psychological factors that might kind
Mm.
of be underlying, or particular kind of events and things. Like from my own experience, they were desperately trying to work out if there was any trauma that
Mhm.
I had experienced. And I was like, no, I've got, luckily I've got nothing, but
Yeah.
I'm still, I still am struggling with this.
Yeah.
And they couldn't get their heads around that. But of course,
Yes.
people are going to have, different levels of trauma, etc. But there's lots of other factors and
Yeah.
lots of other things at play. So I kind of feel like you're right about the whole kind of layer thing, but
Yeah.
hopefully, if I don't know, you can catch it that little bit earlier, you might be able to get to the root of it easier. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's really interesting what you were saying there about, I think one of the few things that clinicians are taught about dissociation is when they do their trauma training, and they're sort of told, oh, dissociation is a symptom of trauma. And I
Mm,
guess, I kind of want to shine the spotlight on dissociation itself, really, because it's clear, you've said this yourself, it's clear that it can happen in the absence of trauma.
mhm,
And that's actually quite a tricky and perhaps controversial thing to say in the field of dissociation, unfortunately, because there were some really big arguments amongst researchers, I want to say in the sort of 90s and noughties, um, with two particular sort of opposing sides almost getting into quite a fight about the role of trauma and dissociation, and whether or not
mhm,
you could have it without trauma, and whether saying that was kind of denying people's trauma. And I'm hoping that we can kind of move past that a little bit in the new generation of researchers, at least, to kind of say, well, it's obvious that trauma can cause dissociation.
mhm.
Obviously, it can. But what I want to know with my own research is, how does that work? Because if
Yeah.
we know how trauma can cause dissociation, then we can also figure out how people without trauma can have experienced it. Maybe that how is the reason why. And I think this
Mhm.
is coming to what you said in the introduction. I'm interested in things like alexithymia or alexithymia. I don't know how to pronounce it.
No.
Um, I haven't met anyone who can tell me confidently yet how to pronounce that. But this, what we think of with alexithymia is finding it really difficult to tell what emotion you're feeling and identify and name that
Mhm,
emotion. And I guess something like that, for example, we know that if you've had a lot of trauma, then your feelings might be frightening, or they might be overwhelming, or they might be difficult to figure out. So you could get an alexithymia kind of experience from having trauma, but also from not having any trauma. So if that
mhm,
was the answer behind why dissociation gets stuck for some people, then that's really helpful to know, because that applies to both cases.
mhm.
Um, I am waffling. I'm sorry, Emily. I guess
No,
what I'm
no,
saying
no, no,
is,
not at all.
yeah, I'm saying it's more complicated than just trauma equals dissociation because we don't know
Yeah.
how. And I really hope that my peers don't think that by kind of not being interested in the trauma part as a focus of my research, I'm definitely not denying the trauma is important.
Mm.
I just want to know how.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And I think also I've had someone say that my trauma is being autistic.
Mm,
Now, I don't believe that that's the right way. My experience of the world is as an
mhm,
autistic person, definitely.
mhm,
But I don't think it should be labeled as trauma. I feel like I totally understand when a life event, etc.,
mm,
is described as trauma, but to describe how I am as a person as
mm,
like that's your trauma. Well, I can't like what do you do with that
yeah.
information, sort of thing. Um,
Can I ask, what was that like for you being told that's your trauma?
well, I just kind of felt like they were just really reaching for something. Like, well, you
Yeah.
must have something, and I'm like,
Yeah.
well, I don't think I don't think you can like it kind of makes it into this bad thing that happened to you,
Yeah.
but it's my entire experience of the world. So
Yeah.
I can't affect it, sort of thing. Not
Yeah.
that you can affect it's really difficult. I don't know how to explain it, but it felt wrong
Yeah. No, I
in the
get I get what
best
you mean. Yeah.
the best way
This
to
is
describe it. Yeah.
yeah, this is your way of experiencing the world. For somebody to say, "Oh gosh, that must be traumatic," is a bit like,
Mm.
well, firstly, it's rude.
Well, yeah, and also I said to them, well, you may think that, but I
Hmm.
have been an autistic person all my life. I
Hmm.
haven't had disassociation all my life.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
It was kind of a few years ago, kind of thing. So I managed throughout my teens not to, you know,
Yeah.
experience it. So I don't think you can fully say it's that.
Yeah.
I know the world without it. Like it's so annoying.
Yeah. And I'm actually really grateful that you've shared that experience because that was kind of my inkling was that we shouldn't, as clinicians, start trying to tell other people what their experiences are. I think
Hmm.
it's really unsafe ground because that's not our call to make, really. So, if we
Mhm.
reduce dissociation down to like it's something that happens after trauma, then logically you're always going to try and find that trauma. And if somebody doesn't believe that they have any, we're then into the
Mhm.
territory of telling them that they're wrong, which just
Yeah.
doesn't seem like a therapeutic thing to do. So this is why my research is focusing on dissociation in and of itself, because we need
Yeah.
options for people who come to therapy or come to clinic or wherever saying, I want to work on this. This is the bit that feels horrible, without
Mhm.
trying to derail their conversation and say, well, you must have had trauma. Let's work on your trauma. Um, we need options for people who just want to focus on the dissociation part, whether or not
Exactly.
they've
And
had
then
trauma.
yeah, exactly. And I do a bit like what you were saying about the layers to a person.
Mm,
Being autistic and neurodivergent is a layer to me,
mhm,
absolutely. And it should be considered in conjunction with, the dissociation I'm experiencing.
mm.
But it shouldn't mean that it's caused that.
Yeah,
Like, I imagine there's other things. And I think, just being a very anxious person most of my life probably didn't help all that. But, I feel like that's more the kind of answer is seeing people they've got all these layers to themselves. How
yeah.
can we unpack this rather than blame for things?
Yeah, or like you said, like grasping for straws, reaching for an answer that fits. And I think
Mm,
that's something that I'm really keen for people to get a different message about, because I've definitely had people coming to me for clinical work and saying, well, the thing is, I know this must have been caused by trauma and I can't think of a trauma. And I
mhm.
just I just worry for people kind of like raking through their past, thinking about, is there anything that anybody's done, anything
Yeah.
anybody's said? And like, if you don't believe that you've had trauma, if you honestly feel in your heart of hearts that is not an explanation for you, that's a
Mhm.
good thing. And
Yeah.
that's not something to go back and try and find something. Like we can think about how this developed without having to go back and, yeah, grasp at those straws. I think that's
Mm,
worrying. And I think the reason that's worrying to me is when people were having this big argument in the 90s and noughties. This was when people started getting into kind of recovered memory, and that you could recover memories of childhood trauma and childhood abuse.
Mhm.
Um, and apparently, at that time, there were lots of stories of people kind of turning around and suing their parents for things that they say happen, and their parents said never happened. And I mean, just let's not put
Wow.
people through that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's wild. And
Yeah.
and also I feel like just the way that not the kind of questioning around it, but kind of the approach to, what happened around the time it started
Mm.
isn't it's not all. I understand that it might be if it is kind of a, traumatic event. I understand that. But
Mm.
it might not, it might not have started because of
Mhm.
something singular.
Mhm.
I've been asked, well, why, what happened at that time? It's like nothing. I just noticed it
Yeah.
initially when I was brushing my teeth. Literally, that's it.
Yeah.
um so it is. I get that there's it's such a wide kind of variety of people that experience dissociation, but not everyone can pinpoint why,
Yeah. Yeah.
or a certain time kind of thing.
Yeah. And again, this is another kind of thing that I'm trying to put across with all of my research, is that we need to kind of have a better idea about what we're talking about when we're talking about dissociation, because absolutely there is kind of a trauma-based dissociation, that people
Mhm.
notice it immediately after trauma. Trauma was obviously what caused it. That is very clear cut. But I think the kind of dissociation perhaps that maybe you're talking about and that I see clinically is kind of quite similar to depersonalization, where the world feels
Mm.
unreal in this kind of subtle, difficult to pinpoint kind of way. More often than not, people explain to me that they notice this, like you said, during some mundane moment. And then when you do pick apart what was going on around the time, there's sort of just multiple stresses. Like each one on its own
Yeah.
probably wouldn't cause a problem, but the fact that you're trying to juggle all of them at once is just more
Mhm.
than your brain can handle.
Mhm.
um, so yeah, I had one client who described it as having too many tabs open on the computer and everything just runs really slowly. And that's still the best analogy I've got. Like when you've got too many tabs open, each one on its own, not a problem, but together
Yeah,
it creates a bit of an issue.
exactly. And learning how to kind of, I don't know, not filter out the tabs, but maybe close them one by one would be really helpful.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah, tricky.
I'm working on that.
just if you could work out a way to just restart my brain, that'd be really helpful. Because if I
I think that's
restart my
outside of my
computer,
area. Yeah. But then you
that
have to
works.
close all the tabs, you see. And I did have a colleague
Yeah.
once who, I mean, every time I looked over at her desk, it frightened me, the level of stuff going on there. But she also never closed a tab. She had hundreds of tabs open.
Oh my
Um,
word.
so some people are just very attached to those tabs. So yeah, maybe reviewing what's in them and whether you still need them.
Yes, that's a better way of putting it,
There we
rather
go.
than me just being like, please restart me. As much as that would be really helpful.
Yeah.
Oh.
Spa day, would that count? I don't know.
Do you know what? It might be the only way. I was gonna go back to something I mentioned in the introduction,
Mm,
which was the felt sense of anomaly. I
yes.
really didn't say that properly, but I would love for you to explain that type of dissociation, and also the fact that you have your own scale.
Yes.
I This fascinates me that you have your own diagnostic scale. How does that come about?
Yeah, yeah. I have to say, I'm kind of regretting putting my name on the scale now, because it means that I get this really awkward, sort of embarrassing moment every time I suggest that we use it in a study, where I'm like, why don't we use the um, dissociation scale? It just feels
You're
very
like, my work.
narcissistic. Yeah, the one named after me. Um, yeah, I kind of wish I came up with a snappy acronym instead of using my name, but there you go. Um, but to answer your question, yeah, the felt sense of anomaly dissociation is essentially my kind of answer to what I was saying before about we need to be better at talking about what kind of dissociation we're talking about.
Mhm.
So traditionally, I think a lot of the older papers talk about dissociation as if it's kind of one monolith, like one thing with all of these very different experiences encased within it. So
Mhm.
I mean, so many different things have been called dissociative at one point or another. So, trauma flashbacks, dissociative seizures, dissociative
Mm.
identity disorder, medically unexplained symptoms, dissociative fugue. So, like, these wild kind of newspaper stories about man turns up on a beach and he can't remember anything about himself, but he can play the piano,
Yeah, yeah.
all of these things people have at one point said, oh, that's dissociation. So, what happens when you're reading these papers, and one of the reasons I really feel for my students, they kind of say dissociation, they don't say what they mean.
Mm.
So I've kind of been standing on my soapbox quite a lot, saying we need to kind of get better at splitting this down into kind of particular experiences. And this is what we do in psychosis. So I'm kind of borrowing this from my previous experiences. When you say psychosis, you're talking about a whole bunch of very different things. And even when we say schizophrenia, when you look at the diagnostic criteria for that, you can have a bunch of people in a room, all with that experience, with that label, none of
Mm.
which, nobody having kind of the same pattern of experiences as the person next to them.
Mm.
Um, so I think we might need to do a similar thing with dissociation, where we say, right, that's the umbrella term, but within this we have experiences of multiplicity, which is where you can feel like different people within one person.
Mhm.
Experiences of depersonalization, where you feel detached or disconnected from yourself. We can have experiences of this, that, and the other, and then we need to figure out, are all of these things caused the same way? Are they all maintained the same way? How would we treat them? Could we treat them in the same way, or do they need individual specific interventions? So, my last research team, as I said, we were focusing specifically on paranoia because of the way that that works, and that working in a little bit of a different way to some of the other psychosis experiences. So,
Mhm.
my PhD, I started off saying, right, I need to define the problem. I need to define dissociation. And I spent the first year doing that. So I spent a third of
Wow.
my time just being like, what is this?
Mhm.
Which I hope is reassuring to people who are experiencing it, that, yeah, it is hard to figure out.
Mm.
Takes a year of full-time work to come up with some kind of answer, apparently. Basically, what I did is I went to people who'd experienced it and asked them what it felt like, and I was looking for some kind of consistent answer that they were all giving. At the same time, I was also going through all of the scientific literature where they'd sort of analyzed measures of dissociation, because I figured if you're measuring dissociation using a scale,
Mm.
that must tell you what it is because it's measuring it.
Mhm.
So I thought, well, if I took all of the scientific papers that have done kind of statistical analysis on these measures and then look for themes across those, if there's a particular kind of word that's always popping up, doesn't matter which scale you're using, that must be important.
Yeah.
Um, what I ended up with was absolutely no helpful information from the measures, because they were all, I think it had like 77 different unique answers to what dissociation included, which is too many things.
Wow.
But the people who were telling me about their experiences, that was incredibly helpful.
Mhm.
um, what I realized is they were all really struggling to put into words this experience. So that told me it was something very subjective, very kind of experienced in your body, experienced as a feeling.
Mhm.
And they were all trying to describe that something was just off or wrong or, weird. Um,
Yep. Mhm.
so, to put it in fancy academic language, what that is a felt sense, a feeling of anomaly, weirdness. So, really,
Mhm.
what I should have called it is feeling strange. Feeling
I like
strange
that.
dissociation. Yeah,
That's the
that's
basic way of
the
putting it. Yep.
everyday language. So, yeah, just call me Dr. Strange. Yeah, so this really embodied personal experience of something being just a bit weird and off, which is
Mhm.
very, very difficult to put into words. So people are coming up with incredibly like wonderful descriptions just to try and get it across. And I think maybe we just don't have words for it in our, or certainly in English.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, I definitely feel that. Like every way you just described that, I'm like, yep, yep, I get that. Yep. Like the fact that that's kind of a universal, like it's a bit weird, like it is a bit
Yeah,
weird and a bit strange, and something is off. Like
yeah,
you just want whoever you know kind of is around you to just be able to experience it for like 30 seconds, and
yeah,
then they get it. But yeah, that's
yeah,
how I've always felt, is that if I could share it briefly, it might help.
I think somebody did do a VR project. I can't remember who, which is really bad of me. I'm pretty sure somebody did a VR sort of art, like, I don't think it might have even been an art project to kind of
Mm.
explain how it feels to people.
Mhm.
Um, oh, I wish I could remember the details of that. Sorry, but yeah, I think that wanting other people to feel it is definitely,
Yeah.
to understand it is definitely universal. Yeah.
Mm. Oh, that's really interesting. Like, just yeah, understanding kind of how it came about, and the name of it does make sense, even if it is, definitely
Yeah,
an
it's a bit of a
academic.
bit of a mouthful, isn't it? Yeah. No, I wish I could have just called it strangeness or weirdness, but I feel
Yeah,
like that would have got rejected by a journal. But we know what we're talking about. Um,
exactly.
but then I sort of empirically tested. So I tested it with numbers, and that's how the scale came out. The scale kind
Hmm.
of backed up the theory of the idea of what I had. So when I did the statistical analysis on the data, it looked like it was backing me up, which is kind of nice. But then I ruined it by putting my name on it. So
And do you use your own scale in your?
yeah,
Are
I
you
do.
allowed to?
Because
How does that
yeah,
work?
yeah, absolutely, yeah. It's weird. Anyone can publish a scale.
Okay.
Yeah, all you have to do is convince the peer reviewers of a scientific journal that that it's correct and that it's being developed correctly.
Okay.
And I have a lot of confidence in the statistics of my scale because I've had two very wonderful statisticians help me with it. So Esther,
Hmm.
who um, developed the initial version with me back in my PhD years, and then Aidan, who improved it even further and demonstrated that we can use it with younger ages. So it now crosses that tricky 18 years old boundary. Um,
Okay.
yeah, because this is a really frustrating thing with a lot of psychology questionnaires and scales that we use in research in clinical practice. Often people will validate them and check that they do the job either with under 18s or with over 18s. So if you're trying to work across that boundary,
Hmm.
often you have to use a different scale for somebody who's 17 and somebody who's 19, which is ridiculous because then that's just ridiculous. So
Yeah.
um, I'm very, very lucky that Aidan helped me out with updating and improving my scale so that we've now got one that works from, we think, about age 13 up to about age 60.
Wow.
Um,
Okay.
yeah, so and the same questions can be used for everyone, the same scoring can be used for everyone, which is just neat. I like that.
Oh, that's amazing. I've had a look and had previously done other kind of, I think
Mm,
there's like a dissociative scale thing that I had to do to prove that I was struggling with it. But
yeah.
some of the questions
uh
are worded so weirdly or so dated.
yeah.
And the fact that you've managed to span a age range with your scale in itself is amazing. Because just trying to understand, I think I actually had to do it with my mum, like sat
mm,
next to me, because I was just like, I
mm,
have no idea, like what this question's asking me,
yeah,
which surely is not good in a a scale.
yeah,
Um,
and some of them you have to know that it's asking about dissociation. So the kind of
mm,
gold standard one that everybody uses at the moment is called the DES, the Dissociative Experiences Scale.
yes.
um
Okay.
and some of those you're not sure, like, is it asking about depression? And then the child version of that, and maybe it's not the child version of the DES, but there is a child version of a dissociation scale that basically says, like, child lies but says that they haven't lied, and you're sort of thinking, like,
That is broad.
how? So I think what the people writing it clearly had in mind was, there is a memory gap here, that the child might have done something in one kind of personality state, or as one alter,
Yeah.
and then has switched and now cannot remember that content anymore. So you
Hmm.
are experiencing them as lying, but they are experiencing themselves as telling the truth. That isn't
Right.
what the question says. The question says, is a kid pretending they haven't lied to you? Which is what
Yeah.
most kids do.
You need that context. You need to
Yeah,
spell it out in that
yeah,
way.
exactly.
Um,
So, I think there is an art, there is a real art to creating a really good measure.
mm,
And it's actually quite a hard thing to get right. Um,
yeah.
yeah.
So, really, you did well to
That's
manage to tackle everything in your scale.
that wasn't me hyping myself up. I'm just saying it's a hard job. But yeah, hopefully
Yeah.
I've had good feedback from people filling it in, saying that it does. speak to what they're experiencing. And that feels really nice when people kind of look up from it and go, oh, I've been trying to put this into words. You're like, oh, thank God it's measuring the right thing.
Yeah, that's good.
um,
Having that like feedback
yeah,
in front of you
exactly.
must be great.
Yeah.
Um, so I know another area of kind of research interest for you is the sort of psychological factors
Hmm.
that we've kind of mentioned, things like alexithymia, but maybe we could chat about this as well as kind of dissociation and the sort of comorbidity with other diagnoses such as autism. You know,
Hmm.
have you had any kind of experience of that?
Yeah, I've noticed a pattern in that more often than not, people that I work with clinically will say either that they have kind of a confirmed diagnosis of autism or that they suspect that they would quite like to be tested. Um,
Hmm.
and yeah, so I've noticed quite a big overlap between autism and dissociative experiences. This is definitely on my list of ideas, things that I want to look into in
Yeah.
more detail. And possibly it's maybe because of this alexithymia bit,
Hmm.
that I know that quite often autistic people struggle with naming and identifying those kind of internal states, including emotional states. So it's quite possible that that's why there's this overlap, because my research is finding that alexithymia might be a reason why dissociation develops and gets stuck. And if that is something that autistic people are more prone to, maybe that's why I'm seeing so many people clinically who say that that's relevant to them.
Hmm. That's so interesting.
Mm,
Like uh, just the fact that there is potentially that kind of overlap, and also, you know, the kind of knowing what is down to
mm,
what is
mm-hmm.
something I've always found hard personally, but definitely the not being able to label stuff
Yeah,
or yeah, it's really tricky because yeah, you don't know how you feel, and you don't,
yeah.
especially, it's so tricky, especially in therapy, any
Mm-hmm.
form of talking therapy, because everything starts with how do you feel?
Yeah.
And all of the worksheets, especially CBT, start
Mm-hmm.
with like, you know, how did you feel at the start? And then
Mm-hmm.
you kind of go through the process of, you know, how could you kind of the evidence against and for this, and then at the end it's like how do you feel, and it's like no,
Mm.
I can't give you the start at the end.
Yeah.
So it's almost like also the therapeutic practices aren't quite, you know,
Yeah.
suited to someone with many layers. That's how I'm going
Yeah.
to put it.
Yeah. And then, you're kind of doubly stuck there, because if you can't really say how you feel, but then also, I do a lot of work with Joe Perkins, who has written a whole book on his experiences of depersonalization disorder.
Mhm.
And he said to me before that, if you have depersonalization and you're in a talking therapy session, you feel like you're there after you've had a few pints in the pub. So it's not
Mm,
making a lot of sense. It's not really going in. It's not sticking in the way that you'd really want it to. So I suppose if you're struggling with that, and then people are asking how you feel and you just don't know, the whole thing is just going to be, oof, yeah.
yeah,
I wouldn't want that.
yeah, that's a really
Yeah.
good way. Is Joe the person that works for Unreal? Is he the
Yes. Yeah. He's
yes?
on the board of Unreal. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. I thought that name rang a bell because
Yeah.
I think one of the first things I read was from Unreal Charity. If anybody
Yes,
wants
I
to
think
Google them.
do Google Unreal. They are fantastic. They're doing really amazing work. Yeah, I've been in touch with Joe since lockdown. Um,
Wow.
weirdly, I remember this because he was writing his book and he found some of my research and said, I'd like to talk to you about it for my book, which
Oh,
was really
okay.
exciting. So we just kind of started talking from there. And he's been involved in some of the research that I've done. He's co led some research with me. So we did a piece of work for the Wellcome Trust, actually,
Mhm.
looking at depersonalization, derealization, and whether or not it might be viable as a target to improve people's experiences of anxiety, depression, and psychosis. So, some really cool stuff
Mm.
that he's helped me out on. So, I'm very grateful to him. Um,
Yeah, he's very kind of active, and I know like how much Unreal like kind of share other research studies that are going on.
yes, yeah.
That's how I've kind of been involved in kind of more
Yeah.
dissociative stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're always kind of putting on their Instagram when there's another study where
Yeah.
they're looking for more people.
Yeah.
So yeah,
And
if
great
people want to get
resources as
involved,
well. Yes, definitely.
yes,
And tell
yeah.
your clinicians they've got resources for clinicians. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'll have to have a look at that because
Yeah.
I think I just naturally gravitate to it's like what have people written about this?
Yeah.
What have
That too. Yeah. Great
yeah,
blogs. Yeah.
yeah.
I think you said you wrote a blog for them.
I might have done.
Yes. So read that one. Yes.
Yeah. As an illustrator, I was like, I need to visualize this, like
Mm.
dissociation. Like it's just all of these really weird things.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm definitely someone that visualizes things. So
Me too.
yeah,
Hence the post-it note wall.
yes,
Yeah.
I feel that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess also as well that your own website we should
Mm,
definitely mention because you're kind of updating resources
I
as you go.
am.
Um,
Yes.
yes, where can people find that?
Yeah. So I might have mentioned that I recently kind of set up a private practice because I wanted people with dissociation and depersonalization to have somewhere to go where people will have heard of this, and for me to kind of help that link between my research work and my clinical work. So there is a website for that, midlands-ddc.com. So it's the Midlands Dissociation and Depersonalization Centre.
Hmm.
Um, and amongst other things on there, so there is a bit of a blog, but I'm also collating resources. So there's a resource tab there that's got kind of links and videos and documents, anything that I find that I think actually this is trustworthy, this is well written, this is good. I
Mm.
wouldn't mind recommending this to a client of mine. I'm putting it on there, so it will grow as I stumble upon more things or more things get recommended to me.
Hmm.
So there's a section there for people who are experiencing dissociation or depersonalization themselves, but I've also got a section for people who are supporting you, so carers, loved
Hmm.
ones, family, friends, whoever's interested in helping out somebody experiencing dissociation.
Hmm.
And also a section for clinicians, so people who are trying to get their head around how to support somebody in a professional sense, or want to kind of learn more. So that will be there, and I'll be adding to that. But yeah, Unreal have obviously just got really brilliant resources, and so I link to them in one of my resources, which is a bit of a shortcut, isn't it? But there you go. I would
That's all
recommend
good.
them. Yeah.
Also, I think I've just realised that I follow the MDDC on
Ah,
Instagram
yeah, yeah. We post
because
on Instagram.
yeah, and I really like. I remember thinking like, oh, your logo's good because it's got the like jarring kind of D that
Yes.
yeah, which says to me, yeah, dissociation.
Yeah, yeah.
um,
And I have to.
yeah.
This is very cool of me. Shout out to my dad for that one.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah, he's involved in his whole yeah, his area of expertise is around branding and
Oh,
strategy for
cool.
kind of businesses and things. So I sort of went to him like, "Look, Dad, I've designed a logo," and he sort of took one look at it and was like, "I can do something better for you." But I
Excellent.
really, yeah, it was nice actually because I got to tell him about, this is what dissociation is, this is what it feels like, this is what I
Mm.
want to help people out with. And then he came back with this, and I was like, yeah, I think you get it.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. So that was
And
really
also,
nice.
like, it's really nice to see, like, just, I feel like when I'm looking online for, like, kind of therapy or a clinic or somewhere that can help, and they've
Mm,
got, like, nice, clean branding and,
yeah.
an Instagram that's really, like, informative and just makes sense. Like, there's a lot of kind of chaotic
Oh yeah.
private clinic kind of branding going on. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I definitely think it like especially if, you're targeting such a like wide range of people that you might be able to help. Like
Mm,
it's just yeah, simple goes, just simple, clean goes a
yeah.
long way.
Yeah. And I think that's probably, like I said, I'm a visual person too, so I think it
Mm.
helps me organize my thoughts actually sometimes.
Hmm.
So some of the Instagram posts are like little sort of factoids, like just little
Yeah.
bites of information, and I think that kind of helps me as well to think, how can I make this even shorter, even more simple, that it fits
Hmm.
onto a graphic, because I
Yeah.
tend to as you've noticed, Emily, I tend to over explain myself and give a lot of detail. So
No,
there's a
no.
nice challenge in fitting it into an Instagram post.
Yeah, that little square is not
Mm,
big enough sometimes.
yeah. They've changed it to a rectangle now as well.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I had to go through my entire profile and like, because you can resize, but you have to do it individually.
Oh.
You can resize the cover artwork, just in
Oh.
case you wonder.
Oh
Um,
gosh. Okay. If I
yeah,
get a spare however many hours, I will do that. But
honestly,
I think I'm just going to hope no one scrolls down.
just hope that no one
Just look
looks
at
at
the
your
recent
profile.
stuff
Yeah,
that's all rectangular.
yeah. I know. Honestly, like, why are they
Yeah,
doing this to
it's
us?
mean. It's very mean.
It is. So people can find you at your personal website as well, which
Yes.
is
emmacernis.com. And Cernis is not spelt how you expect it to be spelt. It's spelt without the H, so it's Cernis. Yeah. Um, so
amazing. I saw that in your email footer and was like, mental note.
thank you. Yeah, yeah. I'm very used to people pronouncing it in a whole range of ways, so I respond to most things that sound vaguely like Cernis. But yeah, I think I that's been a game changer putting that in my email signature. Honestly. Um,
Yeah, it
yeah.
definitely helps. Like, at least people can hopefully. Also, you'll be able to tell who actually reads your emails to the bottom as well.
Not many people, so thank you, Emily.
You're welcome. And just another person who's, obsessed with details. So,
Love it. Love that. Yes. Yeah. So the personal website, you've inspired me, Emily, basically. I've been meaning for a while to get a handle on this, and I am now. So I'm going to use it as a way um, for me to update kind of what projects we're working on at the university,
Mhm,
any kind of extra kind of bits and pieces that might be more of interest to people who are potentially more interested in the research side of things.
mhm.
And then the midlands-ddc.com will be more the clinical stuff and the resources and the blog.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And a blog. It's all happening.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I can't guarantee the blog will be very regular, but yeah.
Websites are such a commitment, aren't they?
They
Like,
really are.
oh,
Yeah. I'm hoping it's really sad. My new wish list, if I win the lottery, is actually to get somebody who can just be amazing at social media for me, including keeping a website up to date because I sort of,
excellent.
yeah, I remember every now and again. And then, yeah, it's sort of like gardening, isn't it? You have to go out and then hack all the nonsense out and
Yes.
tidy it up and make it look nice again.
Yeah, especially if you're doing resources as well, because I think
Mm,
you mentioned earlier to me about, links breaking and stuff. Like, you got to
yes,
just keep on top of
yes, they
things. It's
do.
effort.
Yeah, yeah, it's very annoying.
I will make sure to link both of those in the show notes, as well as the Unreal charity as well, seeing as we've
Yes,
promoted that as well.
they need a plug. Yes.
They do, definitely.
Mm.
I just wanted to quickly cover with you.
Hmm.
I know you are very busy with all of the research, all of the training and your clinical practice, but what do you do outside all of that?
Ooh, yes. Um,
Who are you?
who am I? Oh, that's the question, isn't it? Yeah. Um, I'm into running. That
Mhm.
waxes and wanes. So I am into running at the moment, which is especially helping now the sun's come out.
Mm,
Yeah, so a bit of running. I basically just do. I've got a fancy watch that my partner very kindly bought me for my birthday. So I just do what my watch tells me, which is great
excellent.
because I don't have to think about it. I just do what it tells me. Um, really into Formula One. I
Hmm.
have been since I was probably 6 or 7 years old.
Oh, wow.
Lifelong fan, thanks to my mother, who got into it from her mother. So it travels down the female line.
Oh, that's cool. That's really
Yeah,
cool.
yeah, it is really cool actually. Yeah, so I'm very excited. We've got a new season starting um, early March. So
Hmm.
yes,
Will
by
you
the
be getting up at 4 a.m.? Because I think it's Australia first, isn't it?
Australia is the first one. Yes, I will. Yeah, I will. I've got a
Dedicated.
tradition. I've been very miffed. The last few seasons haven't started with Australia, and it's traditionally always been Australia. So that's how you know the season has started, because you drag your duvet downstairs. This is the trick. Anyone who wants to get into Formula One, this is obviously going to sell it to you. Drag your duvet downstairs at like quarter to 6 a.m., quarter to 5 a.m.
Ooh.
Turn the TV on, put a croissant in the oven, Job's
Nice.
good. Yeah, absolutely. That's the way to do it.
Excellent. Well, I quite like your idea. Your idea sounds,
Yeah, downstairs bed and
yeah,
yeah, and food always
and
helps.
food.
Food and
Yeah.
tea. Yeah.
Pastries, why not?
Yeah, exactly. It's something a bit special, to start the season off.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
that's
nice.
nice.
Yeah.
That is, it's nice that you make a kind of event of it yourself.
Yeah. Well, you get so excited for the first one, so it's kind of worth it. It's a bit like going on holiday.
Yeah. I like also that both your kind of things that you mentioned were sports in their own way,
Oh gosh,
as
yeah.
your
See, I
hobbies.
don't think about myself as sporty at all, so that's quite a surprise to
Oh,
me.
interesting. I also like that you were like, it kind of waxes and wanes with the running because
Oh
I
yeah.
feel like it's the same for a lot of people. Like
Oh
you
yeah.
either love it or you're kind of that in betweeny sort of, it
Yeah.
comes and goes.
Sometimes I love it and sometimes I cannot be bothered. Yeah, it you just have to embrace that, I think. It's one of those
Hmm.
things that I'm trying to learn to be a bit less perfectionistic about.
Hmm.
That yeah, it's sometimes you just might not fancy it and that's okay. But sometimes, unfortunately, you might not fancy it and it's still the right thing to do for your brain.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is the only thing about sports is that you kind of feel better after them,
I
which
know, it's
is
so annoying,
it's a
isn't it?
pain because it means you have to get up and do things.
And especially as a psychologist, I spend a lot of my time telling people like be a bit more active. So, you're
Mm.
sitting on the sofa, you're trying to put your shoes on, you're like, I should really do this because otherwise I'm a hypocrite.
I love that you're that critical of yourself. You're like, I should really,
Yeah, you got to walk the walk or run the run. You
yeah.
can't. I can't just be telling other people to do it and then not taking my own advice. That's rubbish. Yeah.
But it's nice to hear that even though that is your job, that you are human and also
Oh
don't want to
yeah.
do the thing.
Yeah, that's why I have so much empathy with people saying, "Oh, I really couldn't face it." I was like, "Yeah, I know, but unfortunately, it does actually work, and I know that from a personal experience too."
Yeah, it is
Yeah.
annoying, but yeah,
Yeah,
very
so
true.
so annoying. Yeah, I wish it felt that good beforehand. Then it would be easy to go. But
Yes.
yeah, never mind.
Well, thank you so much for spending an hour and 15 minutes of your life with me. I really appreciate you taking some time out of your very busy life to chat to me. And yeah, as I said, I will link all of the things mentioned in the show notes. But yeah, thank you so much.
Thank
Hopefully,
you.
we'll get some more people involved in research and having a look at your resources page. So yeah, thank you very much for coming on.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been lovely.